Texas Lawyers Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the law firm of Abercrombie and Sanchez, PLLC. You can find us on the internet at astxlegal.com or by calling 1-888-981-7509. Your hosts are Bryan Abercrombie and Sanchez. Bryan has been practicing law for 18 years and is board certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization in the area of family law. Sam has been practicing for 13 years, is licensed in both Texas and Florida, and is a certified mediator. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and all views are the opinion of the hosts. It is not designed to provide legal advice for your particular legal matter, and it should not replace the advice of competent counsel. Welcome, and we hope you enjoy the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast.
Morning, Sam. Welcome to the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast. It's been a couple of minutes since we recorded. We had some ballot drops. We had some elections. We had some election challenges. We had all kinds of stuff in the intervening couple of weeks since we last recorded.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a minute. It's been a hot minute.
So, yeah, we want to talk about divorces and custody issues over the holidays, especially in a year like this year with the COVID and how everything's kind of a little bit different. But before we get started, let's talk a little bit about celebrity divorces and celebrity divorces in the news.
Yeah, we've got some good ones. I mean, obviously we've touched on, Dr. Dre's in the past. That's heating up. She's she's saying, okay, well, there was no prenuptial, and he's threatened to compel like attendees at the wedding to come to testify about how she was walking around saying, hey, well, I signed this prenup and I totally doesn't matter to me because I love him. It's not about the money. So apparently she changed her mind. But
Clearly
so that'll
it is.
be interesting.
It's not just. But I also want to talk a little bit about the Kelly Clarkson divorce. That's a bit of a hot button.
Hey, look, Bryan. I know you
custody case.
Yeah, I think she was the first American Idol, right? She's the one that came out first.
One.
Yeah, so obviously she's put together a pretty good career. I know that she's enjoying the fruits of her labor. Apparently, he wants to enjoy the fruits of her labor as well.
So what I understand is going on is we're talking $436,000 a month in temporary support payments that he's looking for. That's, my friend, just if you're doing the math, it's $301,000 in spousal support and $135K in child support and $2 million in attorney's fees. So
hey, the guy's got to eat. I don't know if you've been to Montana. I know you have, but hey, getting groceries out there, it's expensive. So I'm sure, daddy's got to figure out a way to pay.
I'm assuming those kids got to travel back and forth from LA to Montana in a private jet, right?
Oh, of course. Look at, it's COVID season. You don't want them exposed to like the general public. So yeah, that's a big number. That's a big number. That's going to obviously spend some time in the courts.
I'm pretty sure. I think if memory serves me correctly, I don't think he got primary custody. I think she got primary physical custody, but he still wants $135,000 a month in child support. Huh.
Well, you don't want your children to like step down in living. You want them to kind of be on the same par as where they were before. Celebrities are always interesting in that regard, Bryan, because we're talking about such huge numbers, but the principles still apply, right? Sure. Even to the everyday person who's out there, because we look at it and we're like, well, that's just outlandish. Who can't freaking live on a quarter of that? For as far as spousal support, obviously in Texas and in Florida, the laws are different about how they calculate child support. But when you look at it, it's a percentage of your income, typically, no matter where you are. And her income is huge. And, when I try to tell people as you're going through divorce, right, you're going to, how you've lived leading up to the point that you file is going to become very relevant to the court's consideration about what they do on a temporary basis. And it seems like clearly, yeah.
And it's everybody, it's kind of the old talk where I heard them interview the CEO of Exxon one time, and they were talking about, well, the Exxon makes this much money off of an oil well, and blah, blah, blah. Well, and his explanation was, do you know how much it costs? It's a business of big numbers. Do you know how much it costs to drill an oil well? And, the profit margins may be relatively small, but the numbers look really, really big. And that's probably, like you said, that goes to maybe the income that they acquired while they were married. I don't know if there was a prenup, not a prenup, whatever the case may be on that. I know he was some sort of manager for her at one point in time. So maybe he's got some interest, further business interest there. And, obviously he's got a life too. And, I don't know what kind of lifestyle they're leading, but, it's a fairly substantial one.
Well, people always say we live to our means, right? Whether you have minimal means or you have substantial means, you usually live to them. And so, we try to tell clients, like, whatever the river is that you're going to set as the path for your life, a court is going to consider that river and how it's flowed leading up to the point that you encounter a court as to what to do going forward. Yeah. So, all relevant considerations.
So like we were talking about, divorces can be crazy. Divorces and custody cases can be crazy around the holidays. So what are we seeing? What are we seeing these days?
Oh my gosh. I'll be honest with you, COVID and the silly season are a highly combustible mix. I'm seeing that, people obviously have much less patience for each other. They're much more distrustful of one another and their actions, whether that's, our president or our president-elect or whoever's creating this situation. I will tell you, I'm just seeing that clients are really less inclined to want to be flexible. They're much more rigid in their perceptions and their positions, which is making for a lot of very difficult and complex litigation. Because honestly, when you take those kind of positions in a complicated situation anyways, it's very difficult for a court to be able to entertain what the best solution is. And getting into court isn't the easiest thing in the world right now. COVID has made it to where judges are like, maybe you can get in, maybe you can't. Some of them are in person, most of them are not. Everything.
Right. You have the normal, and you have kind of the normal end of the year. I want to get my divorce finished rush, along with compounding that with limitation on courts, depending on which county you're in, and depending on like you said, the kind of ratcheting up in temperature of various things. So yeah, whereas I think at the beginning of this kind of crisis, we had more parents than more than not, they were trying to work with each other. I think now the bloom's off the rose, so to speak, and they're a little less inclined to work with each other anymore.
Yeah, and it seems like more and more, and maybe you're seeing something different, but I'm just seeing that clients want to take polar opposite positions. Whether it be COVID, whether it be the holidays, whether it be how we travel during the holidays, states like Texas have
where we travel.
Right. Those restrictions vary by county and, COVID positive percentage rates or hospitalizations. And so, everybody, instead of kind of taking a position where they look at it and they say, oh yeah, we're going to kind of be able to work this out. We'll approach it as a team. It's more and more like it's my way or the highway. And that highway option is more complicated than people think.
And the courts have already said you can't use COVID as a basis for denial of, parental possession time. So at least in Texas anyway, they've been very, very adamant about you can't not send the kiddo over on a possession schedule because you're worried about COVID. That's just not going to fly.
No. The thing that's really kind of complicating things, I will tell you, I had a former client reach out to me. He's in California. Obviously, state's lockdown, kids are with him. He's like, I can't send my kids. And that's a complicated thing. He's like, we're not supposed to go anywhere. I'm sure it's not going to violate the court's order or the state's mandate to take them to the airport. We're not supposed to travel. We're supposed to stay home. And mom's on the other side saying, oh, hell no, it's my holiday. And they are coming. So, it's putting people in very difficult positions. And the holidays are tough anyways, Brian. You and I both know. If the things are going to go sideways, when's it going to go sideways? The holidays.
The day before Christmas, school lets out for Christmas visitation.
Yep.
And holiday break.
Yeah. And most of those orders that people are dealing with, they kind of look at the holiday possession schedule when they're getting divorced as like boilerplate. They really don't pay a whole lot of attention to it when they should. And then by the time they get to that point where they're looking at it and it's complicated, they don't understand the requirements or the prerequisites to getting something done. Whose responsibility is it? What can and can't they say no to? And instantly people are sideways.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for a second. So just for ease of clarification, if you're in Texas and you have a possession schedule, knowing typically one parent will get from the time school, depending on the year, this varies by year, but one parent will get from the time school releases until the 28th at noon, and the other parent has from the 28th at noon to the time school returns. So, and that's flip-flopped every year. So if you had Thanksgiving, you're going to get the second half of Christmas. If you didn't have Thanksgiving this year, you're going to get the first half of Christmas. So, the 28th of noon is a big day.
Yeah, it really is. Florida's a little different in that regards because most Florida orders are kind of custom possession schedules. So it can absolutely vary, and the terms can vary. The pickup, the drop, the responsibility of who's paying for the plane ticket from Florida to California. All these kinds of things are really stuff you need to have a very good understanding of, one, before you sign it. But even if you didn't when you signed it, it's probably worth, rereading or getting an attorney's opinion to kind of give you some insight on how best to handle it if you have any questions.
Yeah, and just like I said, I think if you kind of line that stuff out, I mean, I think this is where, a lot of courts require parents to take a co-parenting class before they get divorced or in the process at some point. And this is probably the time when that stuff comes in very, very handy is, dealing with stressful situations. Holidays are always stressful anyway, at a pandemic where things are or are not shut down, depending on what you're trying to do, and then add to it the normal back and forth that goes between divorced couples and or divorcing couples, and you got a kind of the old perfect storm brewing, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's funny that we're kind of on, we're side, we're kind of dealing with COVID and the holidays, but I would tell you, like, one of the big things that's really come up too, Bryan, as we're kind of talking through this, is testing, right? So like more and more families are saying like, well, we're still going to travel. It doesn't matter kind of, yeah, we know there's a concern. We feel comfortable with it. How do we minimize it? And I've been taking a lot of questions from clients about, hey, so my kid's been COVID tested, 2 weeks ago. Obviously, yeah, we still go places, but he's feeling fine. Now my ex is saying he's going to take him to another COVID test. You and I have both experienced the COVID test. They're not the most pleasant things you're going to ever encounter. So, at some point, a parent's like, I don't want my kid to take another one. And the other parent's like, I don't care what
Right.
you want. He's going to take another one, or she's going to take another one. These are the kind of things that,
And
we
some
just
parents just like to stick a wire up their kid's nose and
tickle their brain. I don't know. It's just like, it's not a fun process, And so really, but I get it, how do you kind of navigate these waters if you're in two households, completely different perspectives? One household is, a mask household. The other household is like, hell no, man, it's a free for all. It's a bunch of bullshit. Well, okay. There's not always a middle ground there. At least obviously we're finding that kind of, just in the country as general. So parents are no different.
Right. You can find mask or no mask if you head down the street to the grocery store. Some people are adamant about it. Some people aren't. So, what do you do if you're the parent that likes, wants everything to be as locked down as possible and, trying to keep your kiddos safe, and the other one, is kind of more of a laissez-faire. Well, I'm gonna take my opportunities and travel because, hey, Disneyland is only half full.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the best time to go, short lines.
Disney World, rather.
Yeah. And so those are things, when you're married, at least you have a meeting of the minds. When you're not, you've been separated for a long period of time, you don't really like each other all that much anymore. It adds some layers of complexity. And I going back to the Kelly Clarkson divorce, situations like that. So they find themselves in litigation, early onset litigation, in a very difficult time, right? So like if you're
Right.
contemplating, hey, I think I'm ready
Especially
to file.
between LA and Montana. I mean, LA's got some of the harshest lockdown measures in the entire country. In Montana, I don't know. I think they're pretty wide open. So you got two super contrasting government responses to this, at play as well.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, so those are things that I think that we're definitely seeing at play. The other piece of it, I would tell you, businesses are really having a tough time with the COVID situation. We obviously were lucky, you and I, our firm, we were kind of at the forefront of doing stuff, more virtually, really kind of utilizing the technology that's available to lawyers. And a lot of businesses don't have the availability to do that. I've been contacted by a couple of small business owners that are like, hey man, do I have any kind of recourse to be able to keep my business open? I own a bar, I own a restaurant, are these things actually legal, what they're, imposing upon us? And those are very difficult and complicated questions as well, because obviously, public health is something that they have to adhere to. If the health department comes down and shuts you down, 90 days of no income is probably worse than, 90 days of minimal income. But
right. Yeah, I mean, and they're talking about, 60% of restaurants, especially small restaurants, may never reopen as a result of this. So
yeah, so I mean, those are, it's just such a crazy time, brother. And then layer on that. So on a side note, so we were talking a little bit at the beginning, we haven't talked since the election, at least on this. We've obviously talked, you and I, we haven't talked like on our podcast. And I will tell you, that still is not a settled matter. And
not even close. From what I've been reading, I mean, I know media wants to report one thing, other media wants to report other things, but I mean, there's a brief due at the Supreme Court tomorrow, so there's going to be a ruling on something. So
yeah, and the crazy thing is, you would think like, how does that really even play into families? But I got a request for a protective order for within a family because of the political situation. Like, one person's like, hey, president-elect, this is done. That dude's a crazy person that's staying in the office. We need to dynamite him out. The other person's like, they're total shams, complete ripoff. End up getting into an altercation. There's criminal charges. Wow. Now they want a protective order. And I'm like, I mean, it's just it's so much that has been compiled in these couple of months on families. And it's just so easy, I think, to find ourselves in a season that typically, people look around and they're like, oh, the holiday season, it's this time of cheer and togetherness and giving. And, I think this is just definitely going to be a unique one for us all.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I follow, a couple of things on Twitter, and you see pretty closely that the protests, while one's peaceful, and I know the Antifa protests haven't been peaceful, but I've noticed that the pro-Trump people and the Antifa people are starting to clash a little bit. It's getting a little bit more, the temperature is just getting escalated up that much more. And, it's happening in a lot of the major cities. I think for the most part, I mean, I'm hopeful that, the civil unrest will kind of die down a little bit as these court cases kind of get decided, because there's nothing that can be accomplished, in the streets, but people are adamant in their position. Like you said, I mean, you've got one person, get him out of there, get him out of that White House. The other person's, no, this election was a sham. And, those are, across the Thanksgiving table, those aren't probably the best discussions to have, or maybe a family Christmas. It's not the best discussion to have as to whether who's going to win the Georgia Senate election, or who won the White House. So,
yeah, and I mean,
there certainly is a lot, leading to a lot of a lot of problems in families, especially families that live in different parts of the country. I mean, there are certain parts of the country that are diametrically opposed to other parts. It's a very, very interesting time to be living in, Sam.
It is, brother. It is. And well, you layer on top of that, like, most of, there's obviously, as Americans, we treasure our Second Amendment right to bear arms. And so, there's a lot of, speculation, conjecture, concern over what happens with that right. Obviously, a lot of states are open carry now. And so I guess I saw something on the news where, Michigan's governor was like, hey, there's about 20 people that are armed outside my gate, chanting, like it was a fraud, get you out of office. And I think like we're in a time where, people are very passionate about their beliefs, rightfully so. I mean, we're not dealing with anything that isn't critical. We're talking about issues that are important to us personally, families personally, but to the nation as a whole. And, when you talk about whether it be COVID, whether it be, individual liberties, whether it be who's going to lead our country, whether it be state, local, federal, I mean, these are all real things that are adding tremendous amount of pressures on every aspect of our lives, right? You and I have seen it. It's businesses, it's families.
This is Brian's own theory, but you can take it for what it's worth. But I kind of think over the course of the last 10 or so years, I kind of think the middle ground, where everybody, in the old number of years ago, you could always find some middle ground between two conflicting positions. But I think slowly over the last 10 years, I think the middle ground between two different issues is slowly being eroded away, and it's either, X or Y. And it's becoming, as it becomes more polarized, there's less middle ground to find. And I'm sure there's middle ground out there for people that want to think about it, but I don't know that people are thinking about middle ground right now. People are pretty but like I said, rightfully so, because like you said, people are becoming so polarized in their positions that the middle ground is being slowly whittled away. I don't know that there's a lot of middle ground left.
Right. And that, I think that's bleeding down into the families. It's definitely bleeding down into the stuff that we're handling more and more. But the good news is that
I'll give you a good example. I had a client that was well, let's put it this way. They're divorced. He's a pro Trump guy, and she's an avid I hate Trump, Biden supporter. So I mean, that was a discussion that was had between, he wants to get the kid a MAGA hat. She's adamantly opposed to it. So, he got to the point where he's like, we don't even, I don't even tell the kids what we're doing. So I don't want them going back home and telling mom they're going to vote. I'm going to vote for Trump or whatever the case may be, because it would just create so much animosity between an already, acrimonious situation with people that don't see eye to eye anyway, which is why they're not married anymore. You add, people with just extremely passionate feelings on one side or the other, just, adding that much more of a layer because they either like Trump or don't like Trump. It just creates that much more animosity in just their little families and the family circle, and their exchanges become more heated. The pickup and drop offs are, there's less cooperation. It's just tough. It's just tough.
Oh yeah. And I'll even give you one that I'm dealing with right now. I'm an avid hunter. I know that you like hunting too. And I will tell you, like, I have a client who called me. He said, hey, I want to take my son opening weekend, deer season. And his mom is like refusing to do it. And he's like, well, they're over 100 miles. So in Texas, over 100 miles, you get the ability to elect your weekend. He had elected that weekend. And she showed up and said, hey, you know what? If you're going to take him hunting, he's not going. And he's like, what's my weekend? I mean, like, I'm taking him, I'm entitled to it. It just became something completely unnecessary. The child's then placed in the middle because his mom has been working on him for, a month, saying like, this is so terrible. You're killing Bambi. Yeah, you're shooting Bambi's mom or Bambi's dad. How would you like it if somebody shot your dad? And so, obviously then he's just really upset, which upset the client. The client's like, hey,
right.
Why does she have to approach it that way? I don't want her to be the only person who has a say in, how he grows up and his perspective on life. And, that's just a really challenging situation that we find ourselves in more and more about more and more things. That's just,
right.
Obviously that's always been a kind of hot button topic between some dads and moms. But I will tell you, like, it just seems to be like we're finding more and more of those kinds of things.
Oh, absolutely. I think, and that's just one example of many. I mean, you name it, whether it's what church they go to or, or if they go to church or not go to church, or, it's just becoming, like I said, more and more polarized, and there's less and less middle ground. There's less and less, I guess, coexistence between people, for lack of a better word. There's less live and let live going on right now.
Well, yeah. And, we're talking about the silly season and how those orders, that was kind of the topic that we wanted to touch on, is to say like, hey, make sure you understand these orders. I'll give you a good example. Like we do a lot of custom provisions, and, arguments start in the funniest ways. But I did a case in the past where, there was a big dispute about when do we do Christmas. Kids were very young. And so, his family did Christmas Eve gifts. Her family did Christmas Day openings. And so to compensate for both of those parents while the children were young, obviously dealing with Santa Claus, they're like, hey, you can have Christmas Eve until X amount of time. It was 10 o'clock. Then the children will come to me at 10 o'clock, and that way they'll wake up at my house for Christmas morning and be able to do Christmas morning there. That sounds great when they're little, right? You're kind of swaddling them all up and you're exchanging stuff, but then all of a sudden you're like, hey, they're 9. And they're like, I don't want to go over there. All my favorite cousins are at dad's. And so like, why do we have to exchange at 10 o'clock on Christmas Eve? These are things that potentially you might have to revisit. And if you're in that position, then I would highly encourage you to, it's not locked. These are things that if parents can agree, you can change relatively easily. So it's really just kind of like reach out to a competent attorney, licensed attorney, somebody who, can help walk you through all these types of custom provisions. And if you don't have custom provisions and you have concerns because of what's transpiring, then you still need to have that conversation with a competent counsel to really give you some good advice.
Yeah, and I think that goes without saying. And if you want something changed in the order, I'd first try to sit down, because anything, at least in a Texas order, anything can be worked out by agreement. So the parties if they agree to something, they're allowed to do anything they want. If they want to exchange it 8:47 on the nose on Christmas Eve, they can do that. It's just you got to have that agreement, or you got to change the order. So yeah, definitely having that discussion with a competent attorney can definitely help. But on a side note, before we wrap this sucker up, do you have a guest appearance that you want to make? Let's see that.
I do. I had a brand new guest. She wanted to appear on the podcast.
Oh, look at that cute dog.
Say hello. I'm the new addition, the Christmas addition to the family. This is Berkeley. Yeah, she's she's camera shy. She's
great looking dog.
So she's the good looking one of us two, the pair.
Yeah, she's the best looking one of the three of us, right?
That's for sure. I'm sure we'll get plenty of feedback on that.
All right, man. Well, we will, we have a lot of exciting new topics coming in the new year. We'll be talking a little more about firearms and your rights with respect to firearms, and we'll be covering some more of estate planning and stuff like that. So until then, my friend, I thank you very much for the time, and we will talk soon.
All right. Sounds good, brother.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the Top Texas Lawyers podcast. If you would like a consultation with either Bryan or Sam, please call 1-888-981-7509 or visit us on the web at astxlegal.com. Once again, that's astxlegal.com. Thank you very much.